July 28, 1944. Brandis Airfield, Saxony, 0419 hours. A thin veil of morning mist clung to the grass of Brandis Airfield as mechanics in fuel-stained coveralls worked in tense silence around a squat, angular machine that looked too small, too sharp, too lethal to belong to any ordinary squadron, its swept wings dripping with dew beneath a blackout tarp. The Messerschmitt Me 163 Komet, the only operational rocket-powered fighter in the world, sat perched on its wheeled dolly like a predatory bird ready to strike. Its volatile tanks loaded hours earlier with the unstable combination of T-Stoff, high-concentration hydrogen peroxide, and C-Stoff, hydrazine methanol mixture, the two chemicals that would incinerate a man to bone if a single drop touched his skin. The lines hissed faintly, filling the air with a sharp chemical sting that forced the mechanics to breathe through wool-wrapped cloths, their eyes watering as they secured bolts and checked seals with the caution of men handling death itself. Leutnant Ernst Hollenstädter, 22 years old and already carrying the hollow stare of someone who had seen pilots vanish mid-launch, stepped out of the dispersal hut pulling on his stiff leather flying jacket, stomach tightening the way it always did before takeoff, half dread, half awe at the machine awaiting him. The Me 163 didn't behave like an aircraft. It didn't taxi, didn't warm up, didn't ease into the sky. It ignited like a rocket shell fired from a gun barrel, climbing to 30,000 feet in under 3 minutes, reaching speeds over 950 kilometers per hour, faster than anything in the air, friend or enemy. It gave 7 minutes of unstoppable power, and then nothing. 7 minutes of fire, followed by a long, silent glide home through a sky filled with Allied fighters hunting comets like falling stars. Hollenstädter approached the aircraft, boots soaking through the grass, and nodded to a mechanic who whispered hoarsely, "Fuel lines holding. No leaks. Not this time." No one laughed. No one ever laughed near T-Stoff. Another mechanic opened the canopy, revealing the cockpit, barely more than a metal shell with a few dials, a stick, and a harness that felt more like a trap than safety. Hollenstädter climbed in carefully, avoiding the fuel lines that snaked under his knees, and cinched the straps as the commander raised binoculars toward the horizon. Radar crews had reported B-17 formations over Leipzig, hundreds of them, crawling eastward like a gray swarm. The Komets were to launch immediately. The ground crew rolled the aircraft onto the main strip, 2 men guiding the wingtips, another carrying a fire blanket in case the rocket motor belched flame backward. "Rocket go in 90 seconds, the crew chief barked. Hollenstädter tightened his grip on the ignition lever. The cockpit felt impossibly small, the glass canopy inches from his helmet, the stink of T-Stoff sharp enough to sting his throat. He scanned the gauges again, pressure stable, mixture correct, motor primed, and prepared for the moment when the Komet would transform from a static machine into a streak of living fire. Then he saw it. A shadow, not overhead, not beside the runway, near the far fence line, barely visible through the morning fog. A figure, still, watching, too far to identify, too still to be a guard, too deliberate to be a mechanic. Hollenstädter's breath caught. The figure remained motionless for a heartbeat, silhouetted against the pale mist, then vanished into the tree line without a sound. He blinked hard, pulse spiking. Nerves? A hallucination from lack of sleep? But something about the shape, its calmness, its confidence, its timing, struck him with a cold certainty that whoever it was had not wandered here by accident. Before he could think further, the crew chief signaled. No more hesitation. Hollenstädter flicked the ignition. The Walter HWK-509A rocket motor detonated to life behind him with a deafening roar that crushed him into the seat, flames blasting from the tail as the aircraft lunged forward on its dolly. The acceleration hit him like a hammer, vision tunneling to a narrow circle as the runway blurred into streaks of gray. The dolly dropped away, the Komet lifted off, and the rocket plane shot upward in a near vertical climb, punching through the mist like a flaming spear. Below him, Brandis Airfield shrank into a mottled patch of earth. The fog line swallowed the runway. The world fell away in seconds. Yet even as the Komet screamed toward the bomber stream, even as the pressure crushed him and the sky turned a hard metallic blue, Hollenstädter could not shake the single chilling thought that wrapped around his spine. Someone had been watching the launch, someone who did not belong, and they had disappeared far too easily. July 28, 1944. Above Saxony, 04:23 hours. The Me-163 stabbed upward through the pale morning sky like a flaming spear, its rocket motor shrieking behind Hollenstädter as he climbed past 20,000 feet with a force so violent it crushed his chest and made his vision pulse at the edges. The cockpit vibrated like a living thing, the altimeter spinning upward faster than his mind could register, frost gathering on the canopy as the air thinned around him. In less than 2 minutes, he had climbed higher than most aircraft could reach in 10. The gauges trembled under the strain. T-Stoff burned through the pipes in a hiss of white steam. Every second of powered flight was a negotiation with death. One leak, one pressure spike, one microscopic crack in the fuel line, and the Komet would cease to be a machine and become a flash of violent chemical light. But Hollenstädter kept climbing. That was what the Komet demanded: absolute obedience, absolute faith. Through the canopy he spotted them, the B-17s, 100 silver shapes crawling across the morning sky in a tight box formation, sunlight catching their wings like metal insects drifting over Saxony. Black puffs of flak burst far behind them. German anti-aircraft guns on the ground were firing blindly, too far away to hit anything. Above the bombers flew their escorts, P-51 Mustangs, specks of silver circling like wolves guarding a herd. Hollenstädter gritted his teeth. He had trained for this moment. The Komet didn't dogfight. It didn't weave or turn. It attacked once. One straight, impossible dive from above at nearly the speed of sound, and prayed physics would do the rest. He rolled the aircraft inverted, stomach flipping as the horizon spun upside down, and pointed the Komet's nose straight at the bomber stream. The altimeter needle spun downward now, wind screaming past the canopy, his airspeed indicator climbing toward a number that would have torn any normal aircraft apart. His breath rasped in the mask. His gloved fingers trembled on the firing switch. The bombers grew larger, silver shapes turning into silhouettes, silhouettes into wings, wings into massive fuselages bristling with machine guns. Tracers flashed past him, bright red lines slicing the sky. His mind narrowed to a single thought: one pass, one chance. He squeezed the trigger. The Komet's wing-mounted 30mm Mk-108 cannons barked, each shell streaking forward in a thunderous burst. He scored a hit. One B-17 shuddered, smoke trailing from an engine, but he flashed past it too fast to see it fall. The rocket motor sputtered. A hard jolt slammed through the airframe, fuel exhausted. Hollenstädter bit back a curse. 7 minutes of fire, gone in less than 3. The rocket plane began its long, powerless glide, nose dropping as it bled precious altitude. Now came the most dangerous part of every mission: survival. The Komet, stripped of its fire, was just a fragile glider with the glide ratio of a brick. The Mustangs reacted instantly. He saw 3 of them break formation, banking toward him like silver predators diving in unison. The radio crackled in Hollenstädter's ear, ground control shouting for him to evade, to turn, to dive, but the Komet could no longer climb, no longer burn, no longer run. He could only glide, slipping through the morning sky in wide arcs, trying to angle back toward Brandis airfield before the Mustangs closed the gap. Bullets ripped the air behind him. The canopy shook violently as a burst passed inches from his head. He jerked the stick left, then right, gliding as fast as the plane allowed, zigzagging between bursts of tracer fire. The world became a blur of sky, smoke, and puffs of flak far below. He forced himself to breathe, to ignore the burning in his arms, to steady the shaking aircraft, but through all of it, one thought kept returning: the figure he had seen at the fence line, watching, waiting, as if they knew this moment would come. He scanned the horizon, just for a second, searching for any sign of that figure again, though logic insisted it had been a ground observer, nothing more. But logic didn't explain why his skin crawled, why his hairs on the neck rose, why his instinct whispered danger in a voice deeper than fear. The Mustangs closed in, two behind him, one above. Hollenstädter banked sharply left, only to see another burst of tracers cut across his glide path. He was being boxed in. He shoved the stick forward. The Komet dove toward a thin sheet of morning fog rolling across the treetops, its speed building dangerously again. The Mustangs followed. The ground rushed upward in a blur of green and gray. Hollenstädter braced for impact, but then he saw it. Below the fog, a shape, a vehicle, parked near the edge of the forest, far from any authorized position, a dark silhouette leaning against it, watching the sky, watching him. It wasn't a mechanic, wasn't a German soldier, wasn't a civilian. The figure didn't move, didn't react to the approaching fight, didn't even flinch as the Komet tore toward the earth. It simply watched, head tilted upward, as if studying a known pattern, as if expecting this exact moment. Hollenstädter's blood ran cold. He pulled back on the stick, skimming the treetops by meters. The Mustangs overshot. The figure remained still, unmoved. Impossible. The Komet leveled out. Brandis Airfield was still miles away. He wasn't going to make it. The glide profile was too shallow, and the rocket plane was bleeding altitude too fast. He scanned desperately for a landing field, anything flat enough to survive the skid landing without the Komet cartwheeling into a fireball. A long clearing appeared ahead, barely suitable but better than nothing. He angled toward it, lungs burning, hands trembling. But even as he prepared to land, another thought stabbed through him, colder than the morning air, sharper than the Komet's knife-edge wings. The figure at the forest edge had not been surprised to see him. It had been waiting. July 28th, 1944. Woods east of Brandis Airfield, 0431 hours. The Me-163 sank toward the forest clearing in a shallow, dying glide, its wings trembling as air bled off the last of its impossible speed. Hollenstädter gripping the stick so tightly his gloves creaked. Rocket fuel gone, altitude fading, Mustangs circling behind him, he knew he had maybe 30 seconds before gravity decided everything for him. The clearing rushed closer, a rough patch of flattened grass bordered by tall pines. Not ideal, not safe, not even slightly forgiving, but better than cartwheeling into the trees at 200 kilometers an hour. He angled the nose upward, just enough, then kicked out the landing skid lever. A metallic thunk vibrated through the cockpit. The Komet struck Earth with a crack that rattled his teeth. The skid dug into the soil, ripping a long wound through the clearing. The aircraft groaned, slewed left, bounced once, hard, then slammed down again and slid 20 meters before finally grinding to a halt in a shower of dirt and shredded grass. Hollenstädter's head snapped forward, his harness biting into his chest. The canopy fogged with his breath as he sucked in air, vision spinning. He was alive. Bruised, shaking, but alive. He ripped off his oxygen mask and shoved the canopy open. The cool morning air hit him like a slap. Above the treetops, the Mustangs circled, searching, uncertain where he had fallen. They would not find him immediately, not here, hidden under the canopy of pines. But they'd be back. He climbed out, boots sinking into damp soil, legs trembling beneath him. Smoke curled from the Komet's scorched tail. The whole aircraft hissed softly, cooling metal, boiling residue from the fuel that had nearly killed him. He stumbled away from it, 20 meters, 30, far enough that if the leftover T-stuff reacted, he wouldn't vanish in a cloud of white fire. He braced a hand against a tree and doubled over, lungs burning. That was when he froze. Someone was standing at the far edge of the clearing, the same silhouette he had seen earlier by the airfield fence. Same stance, same stillness. Dark coat, lean figure, face hidden in the shadow of the pines, watching him, watching the Komet, watching the sky, as if studying all three. Hollenstädter's breath caught in his throat. "Who's there?" he shouted, voice cracking. No answer. The figure didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't retreat, simply watched. The forest around them felt unnaturally silent. No bird song, no rustling branches, just the faint growl of distant mustangs and the hiss of cooling rocket fuel. Hollenstädter took a hesitant step forward. "This is restricted military ground. Identify yourself." Nothing. Not a twitch. The figure merely tilted its head slightly, as if examining him. Then, with movement so smooth it seemed almost rehearsed, the figure turned and walked into the trees. Not hurried, not frightened, just gone. Hollenstädter stared, heart hammering. The fog swallowed the shape almost instantly, leaving only the faint impression of footsteps in the dew. He stood frozen for several seconds, trying to understand what he had seen. Saboteur? Spy? Civilian? But none of those moved like that. None of those appeared at the exact moment of launch, and again at the exact moment of his crash. A twig snapped behind him. Hollenstädter spun, hand instinctively reaching for the pistol he didn't have. 3 Luftwaffe ground soldiers emerged from the trees, panting, rifles in hand. "Leutnant!" they shouted. "We saw you go down. Are you hurt?" Hollenstädter exhaled in shaky relief. "I'm fine," he managed. "The plane. We'll secure it. The command already has a recovery team on the way." Hollenstädter nodded, but his eyes drifted back to the tree line where the figure had vanished. "Did any of you see someone here?" The sergeants exchanged confused glances. "No one, sir," said the sergeant. "You were alone when we arrived." Hollenstädter's pulse quickened. "A man was here, watching, dark coat. He just disappeared into the woods." Another soldier frowned. "Sir, there's no one out here. Patrols are in a 2-kilometer ring. Nobody could have slipped in." "He was here," Hollenstädter insisted, frustration rising. "I saw him at the airfield too." The sergeant's expression tightened with concern. Not disbelief, exactly, but close. "You've had a hard landing, sir. Maybe—" "No," Hollenstädter snapped. "This wasn't imagination." He stepped toward the tree line again, staring into the shadowed maze of pines. Every instinct he had as a pilot, trained to spot aircraft at impossible distances, trained to see what others missed, told him the figure had been real, and that he had been waiting, watching, tracking. The Mustangs circled above, then peeled away, banking east toward their formation. Silence settled over the clearing once more. The recovery team arrived minutes later, swarming the Komet, dousing the hot fuel residue with neutralizer powder. Officers questioned Hollenstädter about the crash. Medics wrapped his ribs. A mechanic retrieved the flight camera. But through all of it, Hollenstädter barely listened. His attention drifted again and again toward the tree line. The soldiers were right about one thing. No one could have slipped through the perimeter that easily. No one could have guessed his landing point. No one could have appeared twice, once at launch, once at crash, without leaving tracks, without alerting guards, without fear. Not unless they knew where to be. Not unless they had come for something. As he was escorted back toward the truck, Hollenstädter gave one final look into the forest, and his blood chilled. Just barely visible between 2 trees, half hidden in the morning fog, a faint shape stood still, watching him. The same tilt of the head, the same silent posture. And then, impossibly, it stepped backward and vanished into the mist without disturbing a single branch. Hollenstädter stopped dead. "Sir, is everything all right?" the sergeant asked. Hollenstädter swallowed hard, forcing himself to look away. "Yes," he lied. "Let's go." As the truck rumbled back toward Brandis airfield, the forest disappeared behind them. But the question gnawed at him with cold, relentless persistence, cold enough to eclipse even the terror of rocket flight. cold enough to sink deeper than adrenaline. Who was the figure in the woods? And more terrifying still, how did they know exactly when and where the Komet would fall from the sky?